Learning English through stories is a powerful and enjoyable way to enhance your language skills. Stories bring the language to life by placing vocabulary and grammar in meaningful, real-world contexts. They engage your emotions and imagination, making it easier to remember what you learn. Whether it's a captivating tale or a simple narrative, stories allow you to practice reading, listening, and understanding while immersing yourself in English in a natural and fun way. Learning to speak. A journey through English. Victor had always dreamed of a different life, one where he wasn't limited by the constraints of his native language. Born and raised in a small town, he'd always been comfortable in his world, where everyone spoke the same language. But when he moved to the city and started working in an international company, he quickly realized that speaking only one language would only get him so far. His colleagues from various parts of the world spoke English with ease. It was the language of business, of success. For years, Victor had watched from the sidelines as others soared, their English fluency giving them opportunities he could only dream of. At 35, Victor felt stuck. He had been with the company for 5 years, and despite his hard work, he had never been able to move up. It wasn't for lack of effort. He was dedicated, punctual, and knowledgeable. But the moment he had to communicate in English, his confidence crumbled. It was like a wall that he could never climb. Whenever his manager, Claire, asked him to draft an email or present an idea in English, he would feel the panic rise. The words seemed to slip away, and his tongue would tie itself in knots. One Thursday afternoon, during a routine meeting, Claire asked him to prepare a presentation for a new client. The catch? The client was international, and the entire presentation had to be in English. As soon as she said it, Victor felt the blood drain from his face. His heart raced. His palms grew sweaty. He had been waiting for a chance like this for years, but now that it was here, he felt utterly unprepared. His English wasn't good enough, he thought. He'd been avoiding the problem for too long, hoping somehow it would fix itself. But now, reality hit him like a ton of bricks. When the meeting ended, he stood still for a moment, the weight of the request sinking in. Claire had reassured him that he had time to prepare, but the pressure was already unbearable. The more he thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. Could he really learn English well enough in time to present to an international client? It felt like climbing a mountain with no training. That night, as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at a blank piece of paper, Victor made a decision. It wasn't just about the presentation anymore. This was his chance to change his life. If he could master English, the opportunities that had always seemed out of reach might finally be within his grasp. He took a deep breath and opened his laptop. He searched for language learning apps, watching reviews, reading about different methods. A flood of doubt and excitement filled him, but there was no turning back now. The first few days were hard. Victor dedicated himself to learning English, forcing himself to study after work and on weekends. He downloaded an app on his phone and started with the basics. Common phrases, numbers, greetings. Simple stuff, but it felt like climbing a steep hill. He stumbled over every word, his accent heavy, his grammar awkward. He would repeat the same sentence over and over again, but the words never came easily. His brain seemed to fight against him. Sometimes he would wonder if it was worth the effort, but every time he thought of the presentation, he would push on. During lunch breaks, he began listening to English podcasts. The first few times, he didn't understand much, but slowly he started to catch certain words and phrases. He would repeat them quietly to himself, trying to mimic the rhythm and tone of the speakers. Sometimes it felt like his mouth couldn't form the sounds right, and his throat would hurt, but he kept going. Victor's neighbor Maria was one of the few people who knew about his struggle. Maria was from the Philippines and had been living in the city for several years. She spoke English fluently, and Victor admired how effortlessly she conversed with people. She had noticed his attempts at learning and offered to help him. At first, Victor was embarrassed. He didn't want to burden her with his lack of skill. But Maria insisted, saying that she had once been in his shoes, struggling to learn the language when she first moved to the country. "It's all about practice," she said with a reassuring smile. "You can do it." Victor began practicing with Maria on weekends. She would correct his pronunciation and teach him new words. They would meet at a nearby cafe, where Victor would try to converse in English as much as he could. The first few times were painful. He would often freeze in the middle of a sentence, unsure of the right word or structure. But Maria was patient. "It's okay. Take your time," she would say. Her gentle encouragement gave him the strength to keep going. Slowly he began to notice a difference. Words that had once felt foreign were starting to make sense. The grammar that had seemed so confusing was becoming clearer. As the weeks passed, Victor's confidence grew, but so did his frustration. He had made progress, but it was slow. Every time he thought he was getting the hang of it, something new would trip him up. He couldn't seem to remember the vocabulary when he needed it the most. The more he studied, the more he felt overwhelmed by how much he didn't know. One evening, after a particularly discouraging study session, Victor felt like giving up. He stared at the textbook in front of him, exhausted, frustrated, and on the verge of tears. He was trying so hard, but the results weren't coming fast enough. It was as if the language itself was rejecting him. But then he remembered something Maria had told him. "It's okay to make mistakes," she had said. "Mistakes are how we learn." She had shared her own experiences, the times when she had felt like quitting, but pushed through. "We all go through that," she had told him. "But if you keep going, you'll get there. The key is not to be afraid of failure." The next day, Victor decided to take Maria's advice to heart. He stopped trying to be perfect. Instead of obsessing over every little mistake, he focused on speaking. Whether it was ordering lunch in English or making small talk with colleagues, he tried to practice every chance he got. He made mistakes, of course, but he kept going. Every mistake was a lesson. Slowly but surely, he started feeling more comfortable with the language. One day, as the day of his presentation drew nearer, Victor's boss, Claire, asked to see his progress. His heart raced as he opened his PowerPoint presentation and started speaking. He stumbled over a few words, his accent thick, but he kept going. Claire listened carefully, nodding along, and at the end, she smiled. "It's not perfect, Victor," she said, "but you're getting there. I'm proud of the effort you've put in. Keep practicing, and you'll be ready." That was all Victor needed. Her encouragement lifted a weight off his shoulders. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that effort was enough. As the days passed, he rehearsed his presentation over and over, practicing in front of the mirror, making sure he knew every detail. The nerves were still there, but they no longer controlled him. This time, he was ready. The day of the presentation arrived, and Victor stood in front of the conference room, a stack of papers in his hand. His heart pounded, but he took a deep breath and began speaking. He stumbled a bit, but he didn't stop. The clients were understanding, nodding along, and when he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one of the clients spoke up. Great presentation, Victor. We can understand everything perfectly. Victor's heart soared. It wasn't flawless, but it was good enough. He had done it. He had communicated his ideas, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged. That evening, after the presentation, Victor walked home with a smile on his face. He stopped by a cafe and ordered a coffee in English. It felt strange at first, but the words came out more easily now. The city didn't seem as big anymore. The language barrier that had once felt insurmountable now felt like a challenge he had conquered. Victor knew the journey wasn't over. There was still so much to learn. But as he walked home that night, he realized something. Learning English hadn't just opened doors in his career. It had changed the way he saw the world. He wasn't just learning a language, he was learning how to trust himself again. And for the first time in years, he felt free.